I'm Brett Baer in Washington, and this is a Fox News alert. We're tracking two big stories at this hour. The Taliban invaded a school and slaughtered more than 100 children in Pakistan today. Extensive coverage of that in just a moment. But first, a federal court in Pennsylvania has declared parts of President Obama's executive action on immigration unconstitutional. Let's go straight to correspondent Shannon Bream for what happened and what it means. Shannon?
Well, Brett, in the first ruling of its kind, a federal judge in Pennsylvania said today the president's executive actions regarding immigration exceeded his constitutional authority and cited the president's own speeches and remarks on that issue. Judge Arthur Schwab writes, quote, President Obama contended that although legislation is the most appropriate course of action to solve the immigration debate, his executive action was necessary because of Congress's failure to pass legislation acceptable to him in this regard, adding, quote, Congress's lawmaking power is not subject to presidential supervision or control. Perceived or actual congressional inaction does not endow legislative power with the executive. Judge Schwab went on to hold that the president's actions on immigration crossed the line, amounted to legislation, and changed U.S. immigration policy. The decision comes in the case of a man who entered the country illegally years ago and was deported in 2005. He re-entered the country illegally but wasn't caught until he was arrested on DUI charges earlier this year in Pennsylvania. Prior to sentencing the man, the judge asked the parties to provide their legal opinions on how the president's recent immigration announcements could possibly impact the judge's sentencing decision, and that led to today's ruling. A Justice Department spokesman says, quote, the decision is unfounded and the court had no basis to issue such an order. No party in the case challenged the constitutionality of the immigration-related executive actions, and the department's filing made it clear that the executive actions did not apply to the criminal matter before the court. Schwab added that although presidents do enjoy prosecutorial discretion on a case-by-case basis, President Obama's sweeping pronouncement involving entire classes of persons in the U.S. illegally went, in Schwab's opinion, far beyond what is legally permissible. Brett?
We'll follow it. Shannon, thank you. Now to another huge story. Less than 14 hours after a lone wolf terrorist hostage siege ended in Sydney, Australia, Taliban gunmen broke into a school in Pakistan, delivering one of the deadliest attacks in that country in years. Sydney and Peshawar, two vivid examples of the violent world in which we live, as the Obama administration tries to navigate dangerous foreign policy waters. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry has the story tonight.
A gruesome terror attack, at least 141 people murdered in cold blood as the Taliban in Pakistan stormed a military-run school. Most of the victims were children, and the tragic business of funerals for the young students got underway almost immediately.
The images are absolutely gut-wrenching. Young children carried away in ambulances, a teacher burned alive in front of the students.
In a written statement, President Obama did not mention the Taliban by name, saying generally, quote, by targeting students and teachers in this heinous attack, terrorists have once again shown their depravity. At the White House podium, spokesman Josh Earnest was careful to stress the Afghan Taliban was not involved.
This is the Pakistani Taliban that's claimed credit for this particular attack.
While the Afghan Taliban did condemn the attack as un-Islamic, the group shares roots with the Pakistani Taliban, and attacks on the Afghan side of the border have been increasing as well, though administration officials may be sensitive to just how bad the violence is in the neighborhood, since today's attack came mere hours after the president declared combat operations are winding down for the U.S.
This month, America's war in Afghanistan will come to a responsible end. Now, that doesn't mean everything's great in Afghanistan.
The president's aides are making the case that Afghanistan is stabilizing, though a similar claim was made about Iraq when all U.S. troops were pulled out at the end of 2011.
Almost the same words you just said about Afghanistan. And then it collapses, ISIS goes in and fills the vacuum. How worried are you we're going to have a replay?
Well, but Ed, I do think this highlights a key difference from the strategy that this president has pursued, from the strategy that was pursued by the previous administration. No longer can the United States be in the situation where we're doing it for the host country. In the situation with Iraq, they were left a stable and peaceful country.
The tension comes as a majority of the public says it disagrees with the president about the CIA's treatment of suspected terrorists. In a new Washington Post ABC News poll, 53% said it produced important information. 31% said it did not. The architect of the Enhanced Interrogation Program, CIA contractor James Mitchell, told Fox's Megyn Kelly Senate Democrats never gave him a chance to tell his side of the story.
Then they issue this report that essentially stirs up all of the crazies and all the jihadists. And so now we're getting death threats and we're getting all kinds of things.
Josh Earnest said he can't comment on individual cases, but for months the administration's had a broader security plan to deal with this intelligence report, and today the president had a high-level meeting to get briefed on threats all around the globe. Brett?
Ed Henry on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. We're learning more about that hostage siege in Sydney, Australia, that cafe that left 3 people, including the suspect, dead. Australian commandos reportedly stormed the cafe after a hostage was shot 17 hours into the standoff. Authorities believe that was provoked when the hostage taker, Manharan Manis, fell asleep and then some escaped. Australia's Prime Minister is wondering why that man was not on his country's radar as a potential terrorist, given his checkered history. The gunman was reportedly on the U.S. terror watch list. A new phase of data leaks today, released by a shadowy group of hackers calling themselves Guardians of Peace. In this batch, the hackers made disturbing threats against the premiere of Sony Pictures' film, The Interview. The group referenced the 9/11 attacks. Meanwhile, 2 former Sony employees are now suing the company for not preventing hackers from stealing nearly 50,000 Social Security numbers, salary details, and other personal information from current and former workers. Stocks fell today. The Dow lost 112. The S&P 500 finished 17 behind. The Nasdaq was off 57. Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush has taken the biggest step yet toward a potential run for president, and that could change the calculations of others. This as new Fox polls show where Bush would stack up in a potentially crowded field early on. Here's Chief Political Correspondent Carl Cameron.
John Ellis Bush, Jeb for short, is Florida's first ever 2-term Republican governor and the nation's first son and brother of presidents to pursue the White House himself, announcing on Facebook that he's forming a political action committee and filing an exploratory committee with the Federal Election Commission to raise and spend money. A brand new Fox News national poll of registered voters tonight shows Mitt Romney, who says he's not running, with 19%. Bush starts officially exploring at 10%, the only hopeful of 14 tested to break double digits. With Romney out of the running, the Real Clear Politics average of recent polls shows Bush leading the GOP pack by 4 points. Bush is getting a jump on the rest of the field with donors, activists, and grassroots organizers, but that also invites earlier and increasingly intense scrutiny. Bush calls himself a social and fiscal conservative, though he backed his father's tax hike in 1990. He's a pro-life Catholic who backs traditional marriage, but on education, he backs Common Core state education standards, and on immigration supports a path to legal status for certain unauthorized immigrants. Many conservatives, including most of his potential GOP primary rivals, disagree with him on both.
I'm not going to change what I believe, and my beliefs, I think, are good, solid, mainstream conservative thought. Winning with purpose, winning with meaning, winning with your integrity is what I'm trying to talk about. Yeah.
On the Democratic side, the Fox poll shows Hillary Clinton at 62%, a 50-point lead over Elizabeth Warren, who's got a 2-point edge on Vice President Joe Biden. Other potential Clinton rivals don't even show up in most polls. Former Virginia Democratic U.S. Senator and former Navy Secretary Jim Webb announced his exploratory a couple of months ago. Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley's finding it hard to raise money in Clinton's shadow and has delayed his decision to run or not till later this spring. And Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders, a self-described socialist, is out there too. The prospect of another Bush-Clinton presidential election inspires some and outrages others. The Fox poll suggests 41% believe being related to previous presidents will help, to 30% who think it'll hurt. When Clinton's matched up against potential GOP rivals, the Fox polls show Clinton way ahead and only one Republican within single digits, Jeb Bush.
Technically, Mr. Bush is not yet an officially declared candidate, but as a practical matter, when politicians start exploring the presidency, they don't usually turn back until they're either beaten or move into the Oval Office, Brett.
And quickly, does it suck up money early on?
Oh, big time. The idea is that there's so many candidates out there saying they're exploring or thinking about it or thinking about it. Jeb Bush plants the flag, and a lot of those scatter.
Okay, Carl, thank you. Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz in studio with reaction to Jeb Bush and his move, as well as what Cruz thinks about his critics from both sides of the aisle, and all of the back and forth on Capitol Hill. You don't want to miss that just a bit later. Still ahead, are sanctions starting to take their toll on the Russian economy? First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. Fox 5 in Atlanta has the story of a serial killer arrested for a fourth murder. 34-year-old Eamon Presley had already been charged in the deaths of 2 homeless men and a hairstylist. Police don't yet have a motive. WHBQ in Memphis has the story of the interagency cooperation on a tragic murder investigation. The FBI, ATF, and the U.S. Marshals are all working to find out who killed Jessica Chambers. The 19-year-old was doused in flames and burned alive early last week. And this is a live look at Philadelphia from WTXF. The big story there tonight is the end of a manhunt in suburban Philadelphia for ex-Marine Bradley William Stone. The suspect, who is thought to have killed his ex-wife and 5 of her relatives, was found dead in a forest a few hundred yards from his home. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.